Ancient Egypt appears to have been a civilization deeply fixated on death. From the construction of pyramids to the practice of mummification, much of what defines Egyptian culture centers around funerary traditions. However, a closer examination reveals that the Egyptians were not obsessed with death itself, but rather with the methods of overcoming it. Pyramids served as resurrection devices for the pharaohs, while mummies were crafted to house the eternal spirits of the deceased. The prominence of burial practices and grave goods in modern perceptions of ancient Egypt likely results from cemeteries located at the desert's edge surviving better than the towns and villages on the floodplain. Tombs have provided archaeologists with rich and relatively accessible finds, whereas excavating ancient settlements remains challenging, painstaking, and less glamorous. Nevertheless, the significance of beliefs about the afterlife and related customs in ancient Egypt cannot be dismissed as merely a result of archaeological preservation. Proper preparation for the world beyond was considered vital to prevent death from resulting in total obliteration. Although hope for an afterlife and the necessary preparations for it date back to Egypt's earliest prehistoric cultures, the period of political turmoil lasting from approximately 2175 to 1970 BC after the fall of the Old Kingdom marked a turning point in the evolution of Egyptian funerary religion. Many core beliefs and practices that endured until the end of pharaonic times were forged during this era of civil war and social upheaval. The weakening of the monarchy affected all social classes to varying degrees. For most of the population, the presence or absence of a strong government made little difference in their daily routines. Their long days of planting, weeding, tending, and harvesting continued with the same predictability as the sunrise. However, the collapse of central authority had severe long-term consequences for ordinary people and their families. The lack of effective government allowed corrupt local officials to impose harsh taxes. Neglected irrigation and flood control systems increased the risk of poor harvests and famine. The state's failure to maintain grain reserves deprived farmers of their only safety net. It is no surprise that contemporary accounts from the century following the death of Pepi II describe widespread hunger. For the small literate elite at the top of society, the political crisis may have been less immediately life-threatening but more enduring in its impact. Senior officials could expect to be fed but not to advance their careers. When the source of honor dried up, positions earned through loyal service to the ruler stagnated. Powerful local families, stripped of royal patronage and authority, often chose to govern their communities independently, accumulating many royal privileges for themselves. As old certainties disappeared, so too did the clear distinctions between royal and private provisions that had defined the Pyramid Age. With life growing increasingly difficult and uncertain, the need for assurance beyond death became more urgent. If necessity is the mother of invention, then the harsh realities of post-Sixth Dynasty Egypt created fertile ground for theological innovation. During more stable and prosperous times, as far as we can judge from tombs and grave goods, the ruling class had been content with an afterlife that essentially continued earthly life but without its unpleasant aspects. The richly decorated tomb chapels of the Pyramid Age reflect an era of certainty and a materialistic view of life after death. The primary purpose of tomb decoration, and of the tomb itself, was to ensure the deceased had all the material comforts they needed for the next world. Scenes of busy bakers, brewers, potters, carpenters, metalworkers, fishermen hauling in large catches, and offering bearers presenting meat, poultry, fine furniture, and luxury goods were all meant to guarantee an endless supply of food, drink, and other necessities to support the tomb owner in a very earthly afterlife. While the king might hope to join the stars and become one with cosmic forces after death, this destiny was denied even to his highest officials. In life and death, one rule applied to the king and another to his subjects. These strict social divisions gradually weakened and eventually disappeared as royal power declined during the long reign of Pepi II and the ensuing turmoil. Concepts of a transcendent afterlife among the gods spread through the population, transforming funerary practices and broader culture. Earthly success and being remembered well after death were no longer sufficient. Instead, the hope for something greater in the next world became paramount. Ideas about what awaited beyond death were developed, systematized, and creatively combined into elaborate beliefs. The ancient Egyptians introduced key notions such as original sin, an underworld filled with dangers and demons, a final judgment before the great God, and the promise of a glorious resurrection. These ideas would resonate through subsequent civilizations and eventually influence the Judeo-Christian tradition. During the era of the Great Pyramid builders, resurrection in any meaningful sense was reserved solely for the king and depended on his attainment of divine status. Only the king, regarded as the earthly embodiment of the sky god Horus and the son of the sun, had enough influence, knowledge, and rank to enter the celestial realm. The first signs of this exclusive royal privilege beginning to weaken appeared during the reign of Pepi II. Interestingly, this erosion started within the royal family itself. Pepi's half-sister, Neith, had a small pyramid of her own, inscribed with spells that had previously been reserved only for the king. This subtle break from tradition soon had wider repercussions throughout Egyptian society. In the distant Dakhla oasis, far from the royal court where breaches in protocol might go unnoticed, the governor Medinefar was buried with protective funerary spells taken from the pyramid texts. A generation later, another official went even further, decorating his burial chamber with the very collection of spells used in Una's pyramid. Before long, even minor provincial officials were having wooden coffins inscribed with excerpts from the pyramid texts and new compositions. It is hard to determine exactly how Pepi II's successors dealt with this significant social and religious shift. Apart from King Ibi's small pyramid at Saqqara, the tombs of the 8th dynasty and the Heracleopolitan rulers have yet to be found. Most likely, these monuments included new ways to emphasize the royal status of their owners compared to common people. Nevertheless, the adoption of royal texts and imagery by ordinary citizens marked a fundamental change in the structure of ancient Egyptian society. A clear and ancient divide between the king and his subjects was shattered once and for all. Now, every Egyptian could aspire to divine status in the afterlife and to spend eternity among the gods. At the same time, this blending of royal and private spheres ironically reinforced the king's unique position. Images of royal symbols painted inside private coffins allowed their owners to achieve divinity and resurrection after death. During a time of political fragmentation and civil conflict, it may have comforted people to believe that divine kingship remained alive and active, influencing their ultimate fate for the better. This so-called democratization of the afterlife was far from truly democratic, reflecting a distinctly ancient Egyptian transformation. Equally significant as the broadening access to the afterlife was the transformation in how the afterlife itself was imagined. While many of the pyramid texts emphasized the ancient belief in the king's journey to the stars and his destiny among the indestructibles, some spells introduced a newer idea. This ancient earth god, both revered and feared as the ruler of the underworld, symbolized victory over the decay brought by death and offered the promise of resurrection not only for the king but eventually for ordinary people as well. Eternal life could be sought not only in the unchanging cycles of the cosmos but also through the nourishment provided by the earth. Osiris became the protector of the dead, and his underworld kingdom soon became the preferred destination for the afterlife journey, gradually replacing the celestial realm. The widespread desire to be identified with Osiris after death led to significant, visible changes in burial practices. From the earliest days of mummification, the goal had been to preserve the deceased's body in a recognizable form. By wrapping individual limbs, fingers, and toes separately, and shaping the facial features with linen bandages, a somewhat lifelike appearance was achieved. However, with the deceased now aspiring to be transformed into Osiris, maintaining human features became less important. Instead, the body was enveloped completely in a single shroud of bandages, creating the classic mummy form. This external appearance of transformation was enough to evoke the desired associations, so even the mummification process itself was sometimes shortened or simplified. As a result, many Middle Kingdom mummies are poorly preserved beneath their wrappings. Occasionally, the brain was left inside the skull, or internal organs were not removed, leading to decomposition. Insufficient drying or limited use of costly embalming oils also caused rapid decay of soft tissues. Yet, as religious concerns took precedence over material preservation, a fully intact body was less important than securing safe passage to the underworld. being wrapped to resemble Osiris was considered an effective first step. Conquering death, securing a successful resurrection, and navigating the many perils of the underworld demanded potent magic, which is where texts and images played a crucial role. During the Old Kingdom, essential spells and illustrations were carved or painted on the walls of royal and private tombs, specifically within the burial chambers and chapels. However, after the death of Pepi II, the decline of royal workshops led to the gradual disappearance of these artistic traditions, making tomb decoration increasingly rare due to a shortage of skilled artisans. In their place, detailed wooden models became common. For modern researchers, these miniature models provide invaluable insight into ancient technologies, but for the Egyptians, they represented a humble replacement for the once elaborate painted scenes in a period marked by cultural decline. With decorated tombs becoming scarce, coffins themselves turned into focal points for decoration and became the canvas for magical spells intended to aid the deceased in the afterlife. To facilitate resurrection, the mummified body was positioned lying on its side, facing east towards the rising sun. On the eastern side of the coffin, a pair of magical eyes were painted, carefully aligned with the mummy's face, allowing the deceased to gaze toward the sunrise and the realm of the living. These eyes mimicked the facial markings of a falcon, granting the deceased the all-seeing vision of Horus. Through this rich symbolism, the dead individual was linked to Osiris, lord of the underworld, and was supported by Ra and Horus, the two most powerful gods of the sky. Thus, safely enclosed within the coffin and revitalized by the sun's rays, the transformed mummy embarked on its journey into the afterlife. In line with typical Egyptian beliefs, two distinct paths to paradise were imagined. These were detailed in the Book of Two Ways, the earliest known Egyptian afterlife text. This compilation of coffin texts presents two different destinies, reflecting two competing traditions that had already appeared in the Old Kingdom's pyramid texts. One option was a celestial afterlife alongside the sun god, now accessible to everyone. In this version of paradise, the deceased soul, depicted as a human-headed bird, would leave the coffin and soar from the tomb into the heavens. Each night, as the sun descended into the underworld, the soul would return to the mummy for protection. This concept of the soul, or Ba, perfectly exemplifies the ancient Egyptians' intricate theological creativity. Seen as the individual's personality, the Ba functioned as an alter ego during life but gained full significance after death, enabling the deceased to participate in the solar cycle. However, for the soul to be reborn each morning, it had to reunite each night with Osiris. The Ba had a counterpart known as the Ka, an eternal spirit that depended on food and drink for survival. Through the Ka, the deceased could undertake an alternate route. From the land of life, the departed embarked on an epic voyage toward their final goal, the field of offering. The Egyptians believed this mythical land was situated near the eastern horizon, where the sun rises. Though part of the underworld, the field of offering symbolized the promise of rebirth. As the Ka traveled from west to east, it mirrored the sun's nightly passage through darkness and participated in its daily renewal. However, this journey was perilous. According to the coffin texts, travelers faced numerous challenges: gates to pass through, waterways to cross, demons to appease, and secret knowledge to master. In one instance, the dead had to understand the parts of a ship to earn a place on the sun god's bark. Magical spells provided the necessary power to overcome these obstacles, and some coffins were even adorned internally with detailed maps of the underworld, illustrating seas, islands, rivers, and settlements along the route to the field of offering. The vivid descriptions of the dangers between death and salvation evoke a nightmarish vision akin to Hieronymus Bosch's Hell's Capes, reflecting a universal dread of death and a fervent hope for eternal life. The Egyptians feared not only basic human sufferings like thirst and starvation but also bizarre horrors. The coffin texts reveal the intense creativity of the ancient imagination. Despite these hardships, the ultimate reward was well worth the trials. The Egyptians pictured Osiris's domain as an idyllic paradise. Upon reaching this final destination, the deceased could expect an afterlife full of contentment. I shall eat in it, and I shall wander in it. I shall plow in it, and I shall reap in it. I shall have sex in it, and I shall be content in it. It was an afterlife truly worth striving for. Osiris, the god presiding over this agricultural paradise, stood as the symbol of resurrection and the ultimate source of eternal life. By successfully overcoming the challenges and joining Osiris, the deceased secured not only their own rebirth but also contributed to the ongoing renewal of the god himself. Mythologically, the deceased acted as Horus avenging his father Osiris, and in return, Osiris granted them their rightful reward. It is no coincidence that this vision of the afterlife centers on inheritance and succession, reflecting the social context of the time. The coffin text emerged in an era dominated by powerful regional governors and echoed their concerns. Like all cultures, the ancient Egyptians projected their everyday realities onto their religious beliefs. The emergence of Osiris from relative obscurity to become the preeminent god of the dead marked a profound transformation in Egypt's religious landscape. As his worship spread across the entire country, Osiris gradually overshadowed many older funerary deities, absorbing their traits and taking over their sacred spaces. In Jeddu, a town located in the central Nile Delta, the people had long revered a local deity named Enjedi, believed to be a once mortal ruler who had been miraculously brought back to life. As the Osiris cult expanded outward from the royal court, it incorporated these compatible local beliefs. Over time, Jeddu evolved into the primary center of Osiris worship in Lower Egypt, while Enjedi faded into obscurity, remembered only as a distant folk figure. A comparable transformation unfolded in southern Egypt, at the town of Abydos. The people there had worshipped a jackal-headed funerary god known as Khenti-Amenchu, or foremost of the Westerners. This deity, associated with the desert necropolises and the land of the dead in the west, also served as guardian of the burial grounds. Osiris's cult absorbed Khenti-Amenchu's functions as well. By the time of the 11th dynasty, inscriptions at the temple in Abydos already referred to a merged figure, Osiris Khenti-Amenchu. Within a few generations, foremost of the Westerners had become nothing more than a title for Osiris, whose dominance was now absolute. Abydos' connection to early royal tombs gave the town an added spiritual significance and a sense of ancient authority. It likely felt natural that Osiris, the quintessential god of resurrection, should be venerated in the very place where Egypt's earliest kings had been laid to rest. Beginning during the era of civil conflict, Abydos rose to become the central hub of the Osiris religion and one of the country's most sacred locations. The destruction of its revered sanctuaries during the strife between the Heracleopolitan and Theban dynasties was deeply shameful to the northern rulers. Their eventual defeat was widely interpreted as divine punishment for committing such a grievous offense. Upon seizing victory, King Mentuhotep II quickly affirmed his religious devotion by renovating the shrine of Osiris Khenti-Amenchu. His successors continued to support the site, transforming Abydos into a major pilgrimage destination and the stage for elaborate rituals celebrating the resurrection of Osiris. Each year, thousands gathered from across Egypt to witness the mysteries of Osiris, a series of sacred rites dramatizing the god's reign, demise, and return to life. These three aspects of Osiris's myth were enacted through three processions. The first featured the god's cult statue, symbolizing his rule as a living sovereign. Leading the way was a priest portraying Wepwawet, the jackal-headed opener of the ways, heralding the presence of Osiris. The second phase of the ceremony focused on the god's death and burial. The sacred image, housed in an ornate shrine mounted on a ceremonial boat, was carried by priests from the temple to the royal necropolis dating back to Egypt's first dynasty. Along the route, symbolic attacks were staged on the bark shrine to portray the conflict between order and chaos. Other participants acted as Osiris's defenders, warding off these mock aggressors. Though intended as a ritual, this dramatized battle could occasionally escalate into real violence, with intense religious fervor leading to injuries. Passionate devotion has always walked hand in hand with zealotry. The final act celebrated Osiris's resurrection and triumphant return. His image was brought back to the sanctuary, richly cleansed and adorned in splendor. With the ceremonies complete, the assembled crowds dispersed, and peace returned to Abydos. The symbolic power of the Osiris mysteries was so profound that taking part became a lifelong aspiration for many ancient Egyptians. For them, it was comparable to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Mecca in later cultures. Yet, for the majority of the population, travel across Egypt was simply not feasible. Even if they could afford the journey, leaving their fields untended for even a short period could result in failed crops and potential ruin. Government officials were in a better position to travel, though they still required formal authorization to leave their administrative duties and make the journey to Abydos, either upstream or downstream. For most people, the most realistic way to partake in the sacred rituals was through representation. If they could arrange for a stela, cenotaph, or any object inscribed with their name to be placed along the route of the Great Following, they believed they could share in the god's regenerative power as it passed by. This belief led to the transformation of the sacred path leading from Osiris's temple into a prime location for memorial offerings, both modest and grand. The wealthy might commission full statues of themselves, placed within miniature chapels. Those with fewer means might settle for a simple stone tablet, or even a brief inscription on someone else's monument. Regardless of their status, devout Egyptians from all walks of life longed to be associated with the rites. In time, the terrace of the great god became densely populated with memorials, often stacked 5 or 6 layers deep, crowding every bit of space along both sides of the processional path. For those unable to secure any form of representation at Abydos, local festivals in honor of Osiris provided a more accessible alternative. Although these provincial celebrations did not carry the same prestige or spiritual potency, they still offered hope. By reenacting and honoring the resurrection of Osiris in their own cemeteries, priests and common people alike prayed that some measure of divine renewal might bless the souls buried nearby, granting them the promise of everlasting life. Since the earliest days of Egyptian civilization, towns and villages had developed their own religious customs, worshipping different gods and following local traditions, as evidenced by the varied shrines and devotional objects found across the land. But now, for the first time, Egypt appeared to be united under a common religious practice. As the worship of Osiris reached its peak during the Middle Kingdom, the coffin texts began to fall out of use. In their place, a wide array of magical objects emerged, fulfilling similar spiritual roles. These items were designed to help the dead achieve resurrection as Osiris reached the mythical field of offering and accompany Ra on his solar journey. Many of these objects were inspired by everyday life but were reimagined for funerary purposes. Ivory wands, for instance, engraved with images of demons and protective spirits, were commonly used in households to safeguard women during childbirth. These tools were believed to ward off malevolent forces that might endanger the mother or child. In Egyptian thinking, it made perfect sense to include such an object in a tomb, since the reborn soul, like a newborn baby, needed protection from harmful forces. Similarly, fertility figurines once used in domestic rituals to ensure successful childbirth and child-rearing also took on a new function in the tomb, where they symbolized rebirth and spiritual regeneration in the afterlife. Some magical objects found in tombs were created specifically for burial purposes and have no clear counterparts in everyday life, making their interpretation particularly challenging. Among the most iconic of these are small faience models of hedgehogs and hippopotamuses, crafted from a blue-glazed ceramic-like material. Since these items lack inscriptions or associated texts, their intended symbolism remains uncertain, though various plausible interpretations have been proposed. This ambiguity aligns with the inherently layered nature of ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, where multiple, even conflicting, meanings could coexist to strengthen a concept's sacred value. Hedgehogs, for instance, were creatures that burrowed into the earth, possibly seen as natural mediators between the living world and the realm of the dead. When threatened, hedgehogs curl into a ball, resembling the shape of the sun disk, which may have associated them with solar protection and divine energy. Living on the edges of arid deserts, hedgehogs may have symbolized life's persistence against the emptiness of death, making them powerful metaphors in a funerary setting. In contrast, hippopotamuses were creatures of the river, dwelling in the aquatic domain that led toward the mythical field of offering. Known for their strength and aggression, They were thought to be effective protectors against threats. One hippopotamus goddess was also deeply connected with fertility and childbirth. These associations show how a single figure could convey a complex web of meanings reflecting the depth and breadth of Egyptian religious thought. What may seem inconsistent or illogical to modern minds only emphasized, to the Egyptians, the sacred mystery and unknowable nature of the divine. Around the same time these animal figures became common in tombs, another significant funerary object emerged, a small item that exemplifies the Egyptians' creative spirit and practical approach to spiritual concerns. This was the funerary figurine, now found in museums across the globe. Known to the Egyptians as shabti, these were far more than crude carvings. The shabti's origin can be traced to the period of internal conflict in Egypt. Lacking access to skilled artisans, elaborate workshops, or tomb decorations, many Egyptians faced a troubling question: if their body was damaged or destroyed, how would their ka survive, and where would the ba return after its nightly journey across the heavens? The solution was both simple and profound: a replacement body. Early versions of this concept were crude. The physical quality of these stand-ins was irrelevant. Magical rituals would compensate for any imperfections once the figure was entombed. Thus began the use of funerary figurines, an inventive response to the instability and insecurity of the time. However, even after Egypt was reunified under King Mentuhotep and the royal courts regained their artistic resources, the tradition endured. With access once again to finely made tomb sculptures and painted burial chambers, at least among the elite, one might have expected the humble shabti to fall out of use. Instead, its role evolved. Rather than serving as a mere substitute for the body, the shabti came to represent something equally valuable. With the Osirian concept of the afterlife becoming the dominant belief, the role of the shabti figurine truly came into focus. The field of offering, while imagined as a paradise of fertile lands and plentiful harvests, still posed a dilemma. Every Egyptian understood that farming required exhausting physical effort. One of the most demanding tasks was the yearly maintenance of the irrigation system after the Nile's flooding. This meant repairing dikes, clearing canals, and transporting heavy baskets of earth from one place to another. Would such labor also be expected in the next life? The thought of toiling forever in the afterlife was hardly appealing. Fortunately, the Egyptians devised a clever solution. The small figurine, originally meant as a replacement body for the deceased, was reimagined. Instead of housing the ka and ba, it would now take the deceased's place when summoned for work. Shabtis from the late Middle Kingdom began to appear with tiny farming tools ready to perform agricultural tasks on behalf of their owner. To ensure obedience, each figurine was inscribed with a short hieroglyphic text that served as a command. The message was clear: O Shabti, assign to me, if I am called upon or ordered to do any labor in the afterlife, you shall respond on my behalf, whether it be cultivating the fields, irrigating the banks, or transporting soil from east to west. You shall say, here I am. In this way, the Shabti became an essential safeguard for eternal comfort, a faithful worker ready to serve, ensuring the soul of the deceased could enjoy the blessings of the afterlife without the burdens of toil.